Guys, before we even get into this episode, I need you to hold on to one sentence, because this one sentence changes the entire way we should be watching Ethan Plath right now. At his own family's Thanksgiving table, surrounded by people who know him better than anyone, Ethan says Tegan always felt last. And then he admits that he told her many times he would move for her, but he never actually did. That is not a small confession. That is not a cute little, oops, I was busy moment. That is Ethan basically saying, on camera, I made promises. I knew what she needed, and I still did not follow through. And then 2 weeks later, this same man packs up his life in Georgia and drives to Wisconsin to be near her. Now, if you only watch this episode on the surface, it looks romantic. A man realizes what he lost. A man finally chooses the woman he kept disappointing. A man leaves behind the comfort of his family and goes after love. That is the pretty version. That is the trailer version. That is the version you put over slow piano music while pretending reality TV is suddenly a Nicholas Sparks movie. But if you slow down and actually listen to what Ethan says, what Tegan says, and what his family does not say, this story gets a lot more complicated. Because this might not be a redemption arc. This might be the same Ethan pattern, just packed into boxes and moved to a new state. And here is the part that makes the whole thing even messier. While Ethan is making this huge romantic gesture, while he is talking about needing to be where Tegan is, while he is apartment hunting and acting like this is his next big chapter, he is still legally married to Olivia. Not emotionally married. Not kind of tied up in paperwork in a vague way. Still legally married. And that matters, because you cannot start a clean new chapter while the last chapter is still open on the table, staring at everybody like the unpaid bill nobody wants to discuss. So today, we need to talk about what Ethan is really doing. Is he finally growing up? Is he finally taking action instead of just making promises? Or is he confusing a dramatic move with actual emotional change? Because those are not the same thing. A U-Haul is not character development. Let's start with the Wisconsin move, because this is where I think a lot of casual viewers are going to get the episode wrong. If you watch it quickly, it feels simple. Ethan lost Tegan. Ethan misses Tegan. Ethan realizes Georgia is not where he needs to be, so Ethan moves closer to her. Easy, sweet, romantic. Very convenient for people who like their relationship analysis in the same depth category as a bumper sticker. But listen to the way Ethan talks about the move. He does not say, Tegan and I talked about it, and we decided this was the best thing. He does not say, she asked me to come. He does not say, we have a plan. What he keeps saying is, I have to. I can't stay here. It won't work if I'm down here. Do you hear the difference? This is not being described like a partnership decision. This is being described like Ethan has reached a conclusion inside his own head and is now acting on it. That might sound small, but it is actually huge. Because when a relationship is healthy, especially after trust has already been damaged, big decisions should involve both people. You do not just show up with your whole life packed in the back of a car and assume that the gesture itself fixes everything. That is not romance. That is pressure with nicer lighting. And I am not saying Ethan has bad intentions. I actually think part of what makes this storyline interesting is that he probably believes he is doing the right thing. He probably does feel like this is his chance to finally prove himself. But the problem is, the way Ethan talks about it still feels very Ethan-centered. It is about what he needs to do, what he has realized, what he wants, where he thinks he belongs. And the question I kept asking myself was, where is Tegan's voice in this decision? Because if the whole move is supposedly for her, but we barely hear that she actually wants this version of things, then the gesture starts to feel less like a mutual step forward and more like Ethan trying to erase guilt by going big. And that brings us back to the Thanksgiving conversation. Zac is the one who really cracks this open. And honestly, I have to give Zac credit here, because he does something this family does not always do very well. He asks the harder question. He does not just let Ethan float through the conversation with the usual, I'm figuring things out answer. He pushes him a little. He makes him explain what actually went wrong. And that is when Ethan says Tegan always felt last. That line is brutal because it is so clear. There is no confusion there, no editing mystery, no complicated Plath family translation required. Tegan felt last. That means she did not feel prioritized. She did not feel chosen. She did not feel like Ethan's actions matched the importance he claimed she had in his life. And then he adds that he promised many times he would move, and he did not. So let's call that what it is. That is not a distance problem. That is a reliability problem. Distance can make a relationship harder, yes. Long-distance relationships are stressful. Nobody is pretending it is easy to build emotional closeness while living in different places. But Ethan's own words tell us the real issue was not simply mileage, it was follow-through. He said he would do something, and he did not do it, more than once. And when someone repeatedly promises something and does not deliver, the other person eventually stops hearing the promise. They start hearing the pattern. That is why this move is not automatically proof that Ethan has changed. It is proof that he moved. Those are different. Moving can be part of change, sure, but it is not the whole thing. The real test comes after the dramatic gesture, when the cameras are not focused on the drive, the apartment, the big emotional speeches, and the new beginning energy. The real test is consistency. Can Ethan show up in small ways? Can he communicate without shutting down? Can he listen when Tegan has doubts instead of trying to fix everything through one giant action? Can he respect a boundary without turning it into a challenge? Because that is where the episode gets uncomfortable. By the time we get to Montana, the energy has shifted. Before Ethan leaves Georgia, he sounds sure. He is confident. He is saying this is where he needs to be. He is acting like the move is obvious and necessary. But then later, when he is asked if there is a chance of romance in the future, he says he does not know. That answer tells us everything. A man confident enough to move across the country should probably have a clearer understanding of what the relationship actually is. But Ethan does not. He has certainty about the action, but uncertainty about the outcome. And that gap is the whole storyline. He knows he wants to move. He knows he wants to be near Tegan. He knows he wants to fix something. But he does not seem to know if Tegan is in the same emotional place. That is where a lot of viewers are going to split. Some people are going to see Ethan as a guy finally stepping up, and I get that. There is something emotionally satisfying about watching someone admit they messed up and then actually do something about it. Reality TV loves a grand gesture because it gives us something to react to. It is visual. It is dramatic. It feels like movement. But other viewers are going to see this and think, wait a minute. Is Ethan doing this because Tegan wants a real restart, or because Ethan cannot sit with the consequences of losing her? That is an important difference, because guilt can look a lot like love when it is desperate enough. And Ethan has another issue hanging over all of this, which is Olivia. The divorce is not just background noise. It is not some tiny detail we can brush aside because the show has moved on to a new love interest. Ethan says being divorced is extremely important to both him and Tegan. That means they know it matters. They know this is not just paperwork. They know there is an emotional and symbolic weight to it. And honestly, Tegan would be completely valid for hesitating there. If you are trying to build trust with someone who already made you feel like you came last, and that person is still legally married to someone else, that is not nothing. That does not mean Ethan is doing something evil. Divorce can take time. Legal processes can be slow. Real life is messy, which is apparently shocking to people who think relationships should resolve neatly between commercial breaks. But from Tegan's side, it makes sense to be cautious. Because what is she being asked to do, really? She is being asked to emotionally reopen the door to a man who did not follow through before, who is now making a massive gesture, while his previous marriage is still not legally closed. That is a lot. And this is where Isaac's reaction becomes interesting. Isaac is not loud about it. He is not making speeches. He is not trying to control the room, but you can feel him watching the situation carefully. He says he does not want Tegan to get hurt again because of what happened with her ex. On the surface, that is about her past relationship. But come on. The timing of that concern also lands on Ethan, because if everyone fully believed Ethan was ready, if everyone fully trusted the move, if everyone thought this was just a beautiful, clean love story, would Isaac still seem that guarded? I do not think so. Isaac's reaction feels protective. Not dramatic, not cruel, just protective. He knows Tegan has already been hurt, and whether he says it directly or not, he seems aware that Ethan has the power to hurt her again if this is not handled carefully. Then there is Zac. Zac's role in this episode is fascinating because he almost becomes the emotional investigator of the family. He is the one willing to sit Ethan down and not just accept the headline version. And I think viewers are going to argue about Zac. Some fans will say he was right. Somebody had to ask Ethan the uncomfortable questions. Somebody had to bring up the pattern instead of just clapping because Ethan is finally doing the thing he said he would do. But other fans will probably say Zac was overstepping. They will say this is Ethan's relationship, and Zac should not be interrogating him on camera. Both reactions make sense, but personally, I lean toward Zac being necessary here. Because Ethan has a habit, at least from what we have seen on the show, of explaining his feelings in ways that sound simple until you really press him. He can say, "I need to be there." But that does not answer the bigger question. Why now? What changed? What has he actually learned? And what happens if Tegan does not respond the way he hopes? That last question matters most because of the Montana moment. The Montana trip should feel like a payoff. Ethan has moved. He has made the big decision. He is finally near Tegan. This should be where the music swells and everything clicks into place. But instead, it feels awkward, cold even. There are flowers. There is a letter. The gesture is called a mistake, and Tegan describes the two of them as friends. Friends. That word lands like a door closing gently but firmly. Now, we have to be careful here. We do not know every detail of what Tegan was feeling. We do not know exactly what the flowers or the letter meant beyond what we are shown. We do not know if the moment was edited to emphasize tension. But what we can say is this. When one person makes a romantic gesture and the other person frames the relationship as friendship, there is a mismatch. And mismatches like that do not come out of nowhere. They usually happen when one person is moving faster emotionally than the other person. Or when one person is hoping the gesture will create clarity, while the other person is still trying to figure out if they even feel safe enough to take the next step. That is why Tegan saying, "friends," should not be brushed off. Some viewers will say she was just being careful. Some will say she was trying not to embarrass him on camera. Some will say she is keeping the door open but refusing to rush. Maybe. But it can also be read as a real boundary. And if it is a boundary, Ethan needs to respect it without trying to turn friends into friends for now, but I will keep pushing until it becomes more. Because that is where a big gesture can become unfair. A person can move for you. A person can write you letters. A person can bring flowers. A person can say all the right things after saying the wrong things for too long. But none of that means you owe them a relationship. And that is the emotional center of this whole storyline. Ethan may be trying. I believe he is. But trying does not erase how Tegan felt before. Trying does not automatically rebuild trust. Trying does not mean the other person has to meet you at the exact emotional checkpoint you decided was next. This is where the public reaction is going to get intense. Some fans are going to defend Ethan hard. They are going to say, "What more do people want? He admitted he was wrong and he moved." That is growth. And that is not a ridiculous take. In a world full of people who apologize with 3 words and then change absolutely nothing, Ethan actually taking action is worth noticing. But other fans are going to say this feels rushed. They are going to say he is still legally married. They are going to say this looks like a rebound-shaped decision. They are going to ask whether Ethan has actually done the emotional work or whether he is just chasing the feeling of fixing something. That is also not ridiculous. Because Ethan's history with Olivia is going to follow this storyline whether he wants it to or not. Longtime viewers remember the patterns. They remember communication issues. They remember emotional distance. They remember how hard it was for Ethan to navigate conflict in that marriage. So when viewers now hear him say that Tegan felt last, they are not hearing it in a vacuum. They are comparing it to what they already know about Ethan. That does not mean Ethan can never grow. People can change. They can learn. They can become better partners. Shocking concept, humanity occasionally updates its software. But the audience is not wrong for needing more than one dramatic move before calling it growth, because real growth is boring most of the time. It is not the drive to Wisconsin. It is not the flowers. It is not the big emotional confession at Thanksgiving. Real growth is what happens the 5th time the same issue comes up and you choose a different response. Real growth is hearing, "I need space," and not making it about your pain. Real growth is finishing the divorce process, being honest about where you stand, and letting Tegan decide what she wants without pressure. That is what Ethan has to prove. Not that he can move, that he can stay consistent once he gets there. And honestly, this episode is smart because it does not give us a clean answer. It leaves the audience sitting in the tension. On one hand, Ethan is more self-aware than we have sometimes seen him be. That Thanksgiving confession is real. He names the problem. He owns at least part of it. He does not pretend Tegan just randomly pulled away for no reason. That is important. But on the other hand, he still seems to be acting from urgency more than clarity. The move feels huge, but the relationship status feels vague. He talks like someone who knows he cannot keep living the old way, but he does not yet sound like someone who fully understands what the new way requires. That is why friends matters so much, because it may be Tegan's way of slowing the whole thing down. And honestly, good for her if that is what she is doing. Because when someone has already made you feel last, you do not have to sprint just because they finally started running. You are allowed to walk. You are allowed to watch. You are allowed to say, I see the effort, but I still need time. That is not cruelty. That is self-protection. Now, let's talk predictions, because this is where I think the season is probably headed. First, I do not think the Olivia divorce is going away as a topic. I think it is going to keep coming back, especially if things with Tegan get more serious. Until that legal chapter is closed, it will remain a shadow over the new relationship. Second, I do not think "we are friends" is the final answer. I think the show is setting this up as a slow, messy, will they won't they situation. Ethan saying he does not know, and the whole "for right now" energy around the friendship label tells me the door is not completely shut, but it is not wide open either. Third, I think Zac will stay involved. He has already positioned himself as the brother willing to ask the uncomfortable questions, and I do not think that was a one-scene thing. If Ethan starts making more big decisions without clear communication, Zac is probably going to notice. Fourth, I think Isaac's protectiveness will become more important if Tegan shows any sign of being hurt again. Isaac may not be the loudest person in the room, but quiet concern can become very powerful in this family. And finally, if Ethan and Tegan do end up rebuilding something romantic, I do not think it will be clean. I do not think it will be one grand scene where everything is suddenly fixed. I think it would have to happen slowly, through consistency, through awkward conversations, through Tegan seeing whether Ethan can actually be steady, because that is the only version that would make sense. A relationship that was damaged by broken follow-through cannot be repaired by one follow-through moment. It has to be repaired by a pattern. So when you strip away the romantic packaging, this episode is not really about a man moving to Wisconsin. It is about a man trying to prove he can be different from who he has been. And the uncomfortable truth is, we do not know yet if he can. We know Ethan regrets making Tegan feel last. We know he admits he promised to move and did not. We know he finally took action. We know he is still legally married to Olivia. We know his family is watching with mixed reactions. We know Tegan is not rushing to label this as romance. And we know that by the time Montana happens, the whole thing feels less like a happy reunion and more like a test Ethan did not fully realize he was taking. That is what makes this storyline interesting. It is not just, will Ethan and Tegan get back together? The better question is, has Ethan actually changed enough to deserve another chance? And even deeper than that, can Tegan trust the change without losing herself in the process? Because the biggest red flag would not be Ethan trying again. The biggest red flag would be Ethan assuming that trying again means Tegan has to say yes. So now I want to know where you stand on this, because I already know the comments are going to be split. Do you think Ethan's move proves he has finally changed? Or do you think this is the same old pattern, just moved to Wisconsin with a fresh set of boxes? And what do you make of Tegan calling them friends? Is that a soft landing, a real boundary, or the beginning of a slow rebuild? Drop your take in the comments, because this one is not as simple as a romantic gesture. This is about trust, timing, unfinished business, and whether Ethan can finally become consistent enough to match the promises he keeps making.